Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered how your brain instantly figures out if someone's ordering you around or politely asking you to do something? Well, this new study dives deep into how subtle sounds in language help us understand intentions, even before we consciously think about it. This research asks a super interesting question: how do we go from hearing a sound to understanding someone's intention? Like the difference between a command and a polite request. They looked at Bengali verbs and found that tiny changes in vowel sounds can actually signal these different intentions. Think of it like this, the same word, but a slight twist in the vowel makes it feel like a different kind of instruction. The scientists in this study wanted to see if these small sound changes, called vowel height alternations, could actually help us understand the speaker's intention. They figured that if a sound change is consistently linked to specific intention, our brains might use that sound clue really early on, even while we're still trying to figure out the word itself. They hypothesized that certain vowel forms would signal orders, and others would signal requests. So, how did they test this? They did a couple of cool experiments. First, they had people listen to these special Bengali verbs and rate how much they felt like an order versus a request. This was like an intention scaling task. Then, they did a more complex experiment called a Cross-Modal Lexical decision task. This means they played sounds to participants and then showed them words on a screen. And the participants had to quickly decide if the word was a real word or not. The key here was the timing. They played a verb sound, that is the prime, and then, after a very short delay, showed a word like order or request, that is the target. They messed with the delay, called the stimulus onset asynchrony or SOA, to see how quickly the sound of the verb influenced their decision about the target word. They tried delays of 30 milliseconds, 60 milliseconds, and 240 milliseconds. And here is where it gets really interesting. At the 60 millisecond delay, participants were significantly faster at recognizing the target word's order and request when they heard the verb that was supposed to signal that specific intention. For instance, if they heard a verb that is usually used for orders and then saw the word order, they recognized it much faster. This happened for both orders and requests, showing that the tiny vowel changes were actually priming their brain to think about the right intention. Now, what about the other delays? At the shortest delay, 30 milliseconds, there wasn't much of a difference. This makes sense because it is probably too short for the brain to fully process the sound and link it to the intention. At the longest delay, 240 milliseconds, the effect was also pretty small and not reliable. This suggests that the connection between the sound and the intention fades if there is too much time between them. The 60 millisecond window seems to be the sweet spot where the sound cue is still fresh enough to help, but the brain has had just enough time to make the connection. This figure visually shows the main finding. You can see a big drop in reaction time for the speech act condition compared to the control condition, but only at the 60 milliseconds SOA. This is the strong evidence they were looking for, that the sound of the verb directly helped them identify the intended speech act. Another cool thing they noticed was that, in general, recognizing requests took a tiny bit longer than recognizing orders. The researchers think this might be because requests are often more complex. They involve social cues, politeness, and understanding the relationship between speakers, which requires a little more thinking or inferential load compared to a direct order. So, what does this all mean? It tells us that our brains are incredibly efficient. When we hear language, we're not just processing sounds and words in separate steps. We're actually integrating different types of information, like the sound of a word, and what that sound might mean in terms of intention, very, very early on. The vowel changes are like bottom-up clues from the sound itself. And our knowledge about what those sounds usually mean is the top-down expectation. When these line up perfectly, like at that 60 millisecond mark, our brain gets a boost and processes things faster. Now, it is important to acknowledge the limitations of any study. In this case, the researchers point out that in these Bengali verbs, the vowel change doesn't just signal order versus request. It also signals differences in tense or mood. So they can't be 100% sure that the speed up in their experiment was only due to understanding the speech act, and not partly due to the tense difference. Future research could try to create verb pairs that only differ in speech act intention to really isolate that effect. Overall, this research provides really strong evidence that the sounds of language are not just carriers of meaning, but they actively help shape our understanding of communicative intentions. These subtle phonological cues can rapidly influence how we interpret speech acts. And this integration happens very early in the process. It means that the way a word sounds, the fine details of pronunciation, can directly lead to understanding the speaker's underlying goal, whether it is a command or a plea. This study really highlights the amazing complex and fast-paced work our brains do to understand each other. It shows that even the smallest phonetic details can carry significant pragmatic weight. Imagine all the unspoken information we navigate every day, guided by these intricate linguistic cues. So, what is my take on this? I think it is fascinating research that pushes our understanding of how language processing works. The idea that phonology and pragmatics are so tightly interwoven, even at the most basic levels of word recognition, is pretty mind-blowing. The experiment with the time delays is a really clever way to get at the speed of these cognitive processes. The limitation they mentioned about tense versus speech act is a good point. It is always the challenge in linguistics and psycholinguistics to disentangle these interconnected layers of meaning. But even with that, the core finding about the rapid integration of sound and intention seems robust. For real-world implications, this could shed light on how we learn languages, how misunderstandings happen, and even how artificial intelligence might better understand human communication. If we can teach machines to pick up on these subtle sound cues, they might become much better at interpreting our intentions. As for future research, the authors suggest using brain imaging techniques like ERP or fMRI. That would be awesome to see the actual brain activity happening as this phonology, pragmatics integration takes place. Also, exploring this in other languages would be crucial to see if this is a universal phenomenon, or specific to languages like Bengali. And that question about whether the visual spelling of the word affects this process is another great avenue. What do you guys think about this? Does it surprise you that a tiny vowel change can signal so much? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the science of language, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations into the human mind. We'll see you in the next video.